Africa has had enough. The US administration has officially expanded its travel restrictions, confirming that nationals from dozens of countries now face new barriers entering the United States. Among them, at least 8 African nations that qualified for the 2026 World Cup are directly affected, with bond requirements reportedly reaching up to $15,000 in some cases. What was supposed to be football's biggest global celebration is now spiraling into a geopolitical confrontation, stretching far beyond stadium walls. Sponsors, federations, and political leaders are watching carefully. But here is the real question. Will Africa send its teams to a tournament where its fans may not be welcome? Or will 2026 begin with empty slots and a historic boycott? The spark came fast. Expanded US entry restrictions introduced new screening measures, financial bonds, and visa uncertainty for nationals from multiple African countries. While players and official team delegations are exempt, supporters face a bureaucratic maze that could make attending matches nearly impossible. Even holding a valid World Cup ticket does not guarantee entry. Visa approval remains entirely separate and subject to rejection without explanation. For many African fans who save for years to attend a World Cup, the new measures effectively shut the door. This is not a small administrative inconvenience. It reshapes who can physically participate in the global spectacle. And when entire fan bases are priced out or blocked, the tournament begins to look less global and more selective. At first glance, this looks like a travel policy issue, but across African capitals, the interpretation is different. Leaders and commentators frame it as a matter of dignity, fairness, and equal treatment on the global stage. For decades, the World Cup has marketed itself as a celebration of unity, a rare event where political divisions pause. Yet when restrictions disproportionately impact African supporters, while others move freely through visa waiver programs, the symbolism becomes unavoidable. This shifts the narrative from football logistics to geopolitical respect. Many see it as another example of a system where participation is conditional. And when pride meets perceived exclusion, sport transforms into something much larger, a test of sovereignty. Reaction across the continent has been intense. Influential political voices have openly questioned whether participation under these conditions sends the wrong message. Social media campaigns calling for withdrawal have gained traction. Analysts on state media debate the long-term consequences. While no federation has formally announced a boycott, discussions behind closed doors are reportedly ongoing. The Confederation of African Football remains cautious, yet pressure is mounting from supporters and political figures alike. The conversation is no longer hypothetical, it is strategic. Governments are weighing national pride against economic and sporting opportunity, and once the idea of coordinated action enters the public sphere, it becomes difficult to contain. The pressure is no longer external, it is internal, and growing. FIFA now finds itself at the center of a storm it did not anticipate. The organization expanded the 2026 tournament to 48 teams precisely to increase global representation. Africa gained more slots under this reform, symbolizing inclusion. Yet inclusion loses credibility if supporters cannot attend freely. FIFA publicly insists that host nation policies fall outside its jurisdiction, but privately, the concern is unmistakable. A World Cup without full global participation threatens its brand. Neutrality becomes complicated when geopolitical policies affect who fills the stadium seats. If African fans remain restricted while others enter easily, the perception of imbalance could damage the tournament's legitimacy long before kickoff. The pressure on FIFA is not just moral, it is existential. A coordinated African boycott would require unprecedented alignment. National federations would need government backing. The African Union would likely have to provide political cover. CAF would need consensus among diverse member states. Such unity is difficult, but not impossible. The logistical and financial consequences would be severe. Participation in a World Cup generates significant revenue for federations, funding youth development and infrastructure programs. Walking away would sacrifice that income. Yet remaining could be framed as accepting unequal treatment. This is where leverage enters the equation. Even the credible threat of withdrawal forces negotiation. The question is whether the threat remains symbolic or becomes operational. And that uncertainty is precisely what keeps global stakeholders on edge. Financial projections estimate that the 2026 World Cup could generate more than $17 billion for the US economy alone. Sponsorship agreements, broadcasting rights, and tourism revenues are tied to the promise of a truly global event. If multiple African teams withdraw, the economic ripple effect would be immediate. Broadcasters in African markets would face contract complications. Sponsors positioning themselves as champions of diversity would confront public relations challenges. The World Cup's value lies in its universality. Remove a continent, and that value weakens. Corporations invest billions not just in matches, but in global emotion. If outrage replaces celebration, the commercial equation shifts dramatically. Money does not solve political tension, but it certainly amplifies the stakes. The concern extends beyond Africa. Other nations are watching closely. Iran has already experienced visa complications in past US-hosted events. European political tensions add another layer of unpredictability. If Africa takes the first step, it creates precedent, and precedent can travel quickly. A tournament designed as a unifying global spectacle could fragment into a politically selective event. That fragmentation would not merely affect 2026. It would influence future hosting decisions and reshape how international sporting bodies evaluate geopolitical risk. The domino effect is not guaranteed, but the possibility alone shifts the balance of power in negotiations. Global events depend on perception. And perception is shifting. Players across Africa have trained their entire lives for this stage. For many, a World Cup appearance represents the peak of a career. Federations depend on participation for funding. Fans dream of traveling abroad to witness history. Boycotting carries sacrifice. Participating carries symbolism. Some argue that policies could soften as the tournament approaches. Host nations historically adjust tone under global scrutiny. Others insist that dignity should not rely on last-minute concessions. This is not a simple calculation of economics or emotion. It is a strategic crossroads. Each path carries consequences that extend far beyond football, and once a decision is made, it cannot easily be undone. Two futures now stand in front of Africa. In one, teams take the field, fans navigate restrictions, and the tournament proceeds under tension but without rupture. Stability is preserved, but questions linger. In the other, Africa withdraws, reshaping the World Cup overnight and forcing a global reckoning about fairness and participation. History would record it as one of the most powerful political statements in sports history. The countdown to 2026 is already ticking. The world is watching. And the real outcome may not be decided in a stadium, but in diplomatic rooms where sport, sovereignty, and strategy collide. Because this is no longer just about football. It is about who gets to belong.